Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, now streaming only on Netflix.
Drug addiction is a disease. It is resistant to treatment, it is subject to relapse, and it can be fatal.
These people are the casualties of this war, and it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on people.
Teaching people how to be people and providing value in their lives, that's what we're supposed to do as a society, and we have utterly failed this, population.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Fill in the Blanks. Listen, I want to thank all of you guys that have been dialing in to fill in the blanks and spending time with us. We've been talking about some really interesting stuff. All of you have been so great to tune in and spend this time, and I am not going to disappoint you today. Lava for Good's The War on Drugs podcast exposes what they describe as the absurdity of the real-world consequences of 50 years of our failed war on drugs. And we're going to talk about whether that's even the right mindset, war on drugs.
The war on drugs is the excuse our government uses to get away with absolutely insane stuff. Stuff that'll piss you off.
The cops, are they just like looting? Are they just like pillaging?
They just have way better names for what they call, like what we would call a jack move or being robbed. They call civil asset forfeiture.
Be sure to listen to The War on Drugs on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
There are co-hosts here, comedian Clayton English and Greg Glod, Senior Criminal Justice Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. These guys examine the cost of 5 decades of the policies that we have embraced, the policing that's been done, the persecution of people that, in their view, and one in which I share, are sick. These two really cover a diverse subject matter. They peel back the surface of this complicated period in our history and talk about how the war on drugs has really fueled over-incarceration, has actually exacerbated addiction, and come at a very high cost economically. So, Greg, Clayton, welcome to the podcast.
Dr. Phil, thanks for having us, man. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us, Dr. Phil. Yeah, it's crazy just listening to your voice for so many years now, getting to talk to you about this topic. It's really an honor. So thank you.
Yeah, listen, I've been at this for about 50 years, and I've always said that drug addiction is a disease. It's a serious disease. It is resistant to treatment. It is subject to relapse, and it can be fatal. You are not going to police your way out of this. You're going to treat your way out of this, and it's going to take a multifaceted treatment approach and treatment team. You guys are very critical of the way that this has been approached over the last 50 years. But what I love about the two of you is you don't just criticize what's been done. You have some very constructive ideas and attitudes about what should be done. I hate people that just criticize. I mean, shit, anybody can criticize.
Right.
But you guys don't just criticize. You say, in the alternative, let's consider some other things. So let's talk about this. Clayton, let me start with you. What is your biggest problem with what's been done over the last 50 years?
Oh, man, I think the biggest problem for me is just the lives that have been destroyed. Like, people's lives have been taken apart by this war on drugs, and it's concentrated in certain areas where people are already somewhat at a disadvantage from just the circumstances that they're living in. And the war on drugs has destroyed a lot of Black families, a lot of families, period. But I know in my community, I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it be the reason somebody get pulled over. I've seen it be the reason people get harassed. I see it's the reason somebody has to go sit in jail. They have to put up their house to get this person bailed out. Like, I've seen it unravel people's lives. And I do stand-up, and just going around the country, I've been pulled over in every state I've driven in just about. So like you have to start getting creative with how you go get yourself out these situations. Yeah, I smoke weed a little bit. So my thing was I never carry more than I can eat. You know, I'm not going to jail for weed. I'm going to eat this. Right. And yeah, so it's things like that. That's kind of my biggest problem, is just seeing it, you know, tear apart a whole community. And I mean, you saw how crack was treated when it came out. It was a big fear campaign. And you compare that now to what the opioids are doing, and people have a little bit more compassion. And it's a shame that that's what it takes. But I'm glad people are starting to see it is a disease.
It takes some involvement, I think, because a lot of those people that were criticizing addicts in the past are now among them because of this opioid crisis. So all of a sudden they go, hey, this is not so hard to get into. And I've never yet met anybody that told me they started doing drugs because they wanted to become an addict.
Never. Yeah. Yeah. It's not an attractive lifestyle.
Yeah. It's not easy, and it's a very destructive lifestyle, and people are miserable. So, Clayton, what's been wrong with the approach, and where did it go wrong? How did this become a war instead of a partnership? How did it become a war instead of a movement to provide resources to treat these people with this disease?
Oh, man. Well, I think one thing me and Greg always talking about is whenever you have a war, you got to have casualties. So these people are the casualties of this war. And it's not a war on drugs. It's a war on people. If it was a war on drugs, you would stop the drugs from coming in. You would approach it in a different way. And just it being enforced on such a street level where it's already out there in there. And then the policies that they have where career criminals really just tell on other people to get out to continue doing crime is, yeah.
I'm Dr. Megan Sachs.
And I'm Dr. Amy Sloshberg.
And we're the host of the podcast Campus Killings. Our show covers some of the most sinister crimes to take place on or around school campuses, or the cases we discuss have a school-connected theme.
And with the new school year comes an all-new second season of Campus Killings, which will debut on September 16th, 2023.
But if you want to listen to Campus Killings now, you can binge all the episodes from season 1. Available everywhere you listen to podcasts.
I'm Katie Maloney, I'm 37, a divorcee, and I'm out here falling in love every day with myself.
And I'm Dana Cathan, 33, former needy mess, and delusional Leo, but I've never been happier.
Never been happier.
You know that.
Good.
The foundation of this podcast is for people who want to live their life unapologetically. It's a safe space for anyone who's going through a transition in their life or just dealing with the regular bullshit.
It's a religion.
We're not saying that we're looking to start a coven, but that might be why we started this podcast.
But we're not saying that. Join our cult. Community.
The coven.
Religion.
Okay, let's just stick with community.
Listen to the podcast.
Listen to the podcast.
Greg, how did you two get together? Because you're kind of an odd couple.
We are. No, we are really like the next buddy cop movie that's going to be coming out here.
We already took back-to-back photos. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we did the whole photo shoot with it. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's kind of a thing where I've been working in public policy for a few years now, since about 2015. Previously, I was an attorney working in the Maryland area. I was a clerk for a judge, and so I've always been around this. But my first exposure really to the other side of the drug war was during law school, working in the pardons office. And my dad was a cop, and so I really only saw the criminal justice system kind of from that arrest and never seeing kind of the back end of it. And when I worked in the commutations office, I got to kind of see that back end. So once someone goes to the system, how are we actually correcting this behavior? How are we doing this? And all I saw was lengthy sentences, not a lot of work on, treating the underlying causes of this criminogenic behavior through addiction. So that's where I really got my passion for this, and left the world of law because it's terrible, and I recommend no one do it. And went into public policy, and I got connected with Lava for Good through some connections, trying to help people that were wrongfully convicted of certain crimes to get out of prison. And through that, we talked about how the drug war is really kind of the biggest wrongful conviction that we have, in the criminal justice system societally. And we said we would love to do an entertaining podcast to kind of talk about this. And I have kind of the nerdy policy chops, and then Clayton has this amazing, lived experience and intelligence and advocacy on this issue. And, we started hearing his stand-up, which kind of mixed and blended, kind of the real life experience, but just, hilarity. If you ever get a chance to see Clayton, he's amazing live. And so, it was just kind of this, weird combination of people that agreed on this issue. And hopefully it kind of comes into an entertaining and informative package.
I told you I got pulled over in every state, right?
Right.
I needed somebody like Greg in case I did get locked up in any of these states. So it just pays to know him on the policy side. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have an attorney just to keep him in your back seat. And then when you drive around, you got it. Just you'll roll down the back window instead of the front window. So talk to him.
Please talk to him.
Yeah, might throw my dad's business card on the back of my license, just in case. So,
yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Greg, you clerked for Judge Ripken in the circuit court in Maryland, and we know Baltimore is a place where drugs have really been rampant and have been on the streets a lot. I guess as much there as any city its size in the United States. Is this an urban origin? Is it a racial thing? Is it unemployment? What is it that is driving this epidemic in America? And why have they missed the mark so much in their policy approach to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the common denominator that you see throughout this, when we go through this in the podcast, is addiction starts to increase and drive and get to these levels when you see kind of social interactions decrease, when you see hopelessness, when you see, depression start to rise. And so, there's a lot of examples, particularly during the infancy of the opioid epidemic, that it was these kind of, Rust Belt towns that had these bustling factories and job opportunities and high schools and really a lot of things. And then once that started to dwindle, you saw people kind of reaching for other things to kind of fill those holes in that despair. And that's what's happening in places like Baltimore. But this is not an urban issue. This is not a suburban issue. It's touching every part of America. And that's what I think makes this, current epidemic with fentanyl and opiates so unique, where it is touching, beyond just kind of the inner city. It's going across racial demographics. And so I think that's really where we're hitting it. And I think, to answer your second question on how are these policies missing, overall, we're taking this criminal justice approach to stop this behavior that we don't want to see, rather than making it a health issue. We are actually saying, what does the evidence say? What are the underlying issues, and how do we work alongside people to treat them and, stop the demand? We've been really targeted on the supply aspects of the drug war, which is obviously important, but the demand aspect is so much more critical. If you can reduce that demand, actually help people come through, that's the way you get out of this. But that has been the other side of it that we have not done from a, national standpoint to really effectively treat this. And I think that's where a lot of places are missing the mark.
Well, I mentioned before, I've never met anybody that started drugs to become an addict. Both of you talked about hopelessness and people's lives are not where they want. My experience has been that a lot of this really does begin as self-medication. I see it with dysfunctional families. I see kids that are trying to escape a dysfunctional home situation. I see it with people that don't have anything to really move towards. They kind of do this by default, but it is a self-medication type thing. They're trying to fight off the depression, the boredom, the hopelessness, the helplessness, those feelings. And before they know it, they start doing drugs, and then pretty soon the drugs are doing them. And now they're doing them to keep from getting god-awful deathly sick, and days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and months turn into years. And we've got people naively thinking they're going to arrest their way out of that. How are we that stupid? I don't understand.
Yeah, I think the episode we had with Johan Hari really highlighted a thing that I guess a lot of people know, but I never really made the connection, that addiction is a lack of connection. And these people are missing fundamental connections in their life. And if we start looking at it like that approach, and I think we cast anybody away that does drugs. Once you're a junkie, you're an addict, and there's nothing that could be done for you. You turn into a zombie, a monster, however people view. And granted, it can seem like that your loving relative is now stealing stuff from you. You see a change in their demeanor. You see a change in how they look. So, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things is that people are lacking that connection. And you can't just go to jail and expect that to go away because it's drugs in the jail.
I can't imagine a worse place. You know, you're saying how stupid can we be? You know, we could be really stupid on this issue and a lot of other issues. I can't imagine a worse place than jail or prison for someone that is trying to recover from addiction. You know, Clayton brought up the Johan Hari episode that we did, and he talks about this famous study done an experiment called Rat Park, where essentially you put a rat in a cage and you give them a thing of water with that's just straight water and one with cocaine. And you leave them really no other options where nothing's going on. It's just a cage by themselves. They start going towards the cocaine one and they eventually will overdose and die. You put them in a position where you build this huge thing. And this guy did this with a bunch of other rats to have sex with and all the food that he wanted and exercise wheels and everything else. And after a while, they stop going towards the cocaine water. And it just shows you that addiction definitely has a chemical component to it, but it is that social interaction. And our response to this as a public policy has essentially said, if we throw you in this more desperate situation, you will somehow manage to get out of it. I just don't see the connection there. And so you start thinking about what else is going on here and why do we continue these policies? And I think there's a lot of reasons behind that. But we definitely have not been following the evidence or the science or experts like yourself, Dr. Phil, and others on how to actually treat addiction, something that is really damn impossible to do for a lot of people. And we're using a police response with non-experts leading the way. And we've been doing this for decades now.
It's interesting that you say that, and I'm familiar with that study. People say, well, what's it got to do with human beings? Well, it's called comparative psychology, and you can see patterns in the way that animals respond, and it does generalize to human beings in not all, but certain situations. My son, Jay, wrote a #1 New York Times bestseller when he was a freshman in college, and his high school teachers didn't believe it because they said, we couldn't get the little shit to read a book in high school. Now he's written a book in college, and it was Life Strategies for Teens. In this book, he was talking about different strategies for teenagers, and part of it was he got really curious about why some teens got involved in drugs and why others didn't. So across the country, he talked to those two groups. He really had a theory as to why it was the case. And he said he was completely wrong, which he found out when he started talking to them. Those kids that were not on drugs were saying it wasn't that they had a better moral compass. It wasn't that they had somebody standing over their shoulder and telling them, don't do this, don't do that. They did it essentially out of selfish motivation or greed. They said, I want something in my life. I want to be on the football team. I want to be in the choir. I want to get a car. I want to have a job. I want to have this or that. And drugs don't fit into that plan. They had a passion. They had a goal. They had something they wanted, and drugs were inconsistent with that. When he talked to those that were on drugs, why, their basic answer was no reason not to. They didn't have that goal. They didn't have a job they wanted. They didn't have an objective to get into the choir or on the football team or to buy a car or whatever. It was interesting. Every one of them said they were accepted because the only admission criteria for the drug culture was that you do drugs. You could be tall, short, fat, skinny, dirty, clean, whatever, didn't matter. The only admission criteria was that you do drugs. That wasn't the case for other groups that they might aspire to be a part of. And the #1 need in all people is acceptance.
That's right.
Even the most dysfunctional, withdrawn, awkward, nerdy, whatever kid could find acceptance here. The only thing he had to do was drugs.
Yeah.
And he or she was in. Even my son, at 18 years old, figured out you've got to give these people a reason not to do drugs. You got to give them something they want more. Find their passion, set up a goal, give them something to aspire to that this interferes with. Then they, A, don't want it or need it. And I thought, I got an 18-year-old kid that's figured this shit out, and we can't break the code in 50 years?
Yeah.
And this kid barely reads.
That's real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they had to strap him to a chair to get him to read a history book.
Yeah. And actually, I've never thought about it this way, but Clayton, you told me, I've never thought, but like a lot of drug cohorts are probably some of the most diverse groups of people that you'd ever find together. Maybe there's a lesson.
Yeah, well, I just think about even smoking weed, like it teaches you how to be a drug addict a little bit. It teaches you how to hide it. You learn where I can see it as a gateway from that aspect, as now you know where the drugs are. Now you know where the drugs are being done. Now you know who to go to get these things from. And yeah, I could definitely see that acceptance thing. That's spot on.
You know, I've toured probably 10, 15, 20 prisons in during my career. And the thing that always, pisses me off the most is that, all right, we have this response and we send people to jail and prison for things. And we have them here. We have an attentive audience. And it's 2 p.m. You have a bunch of men that are 20 to 50 years old, and everyone's sitting in their bed with their personal TVs, watching Maury Povich or possibly Dr. Phil shows on there or something. There's no classes. There's no recovery. There's so little going on there to provide that value potentially when they get out, to have a trade, to have a skill. And this happens in some places, but for the vast majority, people just kind of sit. They may get a little rec time. They eat their meals, and then they come back out. And then we ask them to be recovered, to have these types of goals in life. We don't give them meaning to live and prosper and leave that type of society when we allow them to go out. And so even when we do have this criminal justice response and we have them here, we just fail to provide that hope for them at that point, to provide something. I think you're spot on. Your son was spot on. Figure that out. You got to give people something to believe in. Think about the things that you value in your life. If it's your family, your job, whatever, those are the things that you wake up in the morning, you get excited to do. And taking all that away or not providing that for someone when they are struggling, of course, we're just going to continue to fail year after year on this.
That was Jay's conclusion when he came out of it in talking to parents. He said, if your child doesn't have something they're passionate about, something they want, then you need to help them find that right now. You can sit there and lecture them, and you sound like the teacher in the Peanuts cartoon, wah, 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 wah. But if you can actually motivate them to say, what is it you want? What do you care about? And it doesn't matter if it's drag racing or neurobiology, whatever it is, find something that is inconsistent with getting into drugs.
Hi, this is Rachel Yucatel, and I'm here to invite you to listen to my podcast, Misunderstood with Rachel Yucatel. This podcast delves into the lives of those who have been reduced to a single headline. Each episode will take a closer look at the stories of those who are on a mission to change their narrative. Join me as we uncover the truth behind the misconceptions, shed light on the stories of those who have perhaps been wrongfully portrayed, explore the complexities of the human experience, and celebrate the power of second chances. Who doesn't love a good comeback story?
We've all seen the headlines in the news of how someone lost their life in an act of cold-blooded murder. And while it's sad and grabs your attention, most people go on with their day without giving it another thought. But have you ever stopped to think about the life of the person at the center of the news story? They were more than just a headline or a statistic. They were someone's loved one or friend. I'm Mike Morford, and my podcast, The Murder in My Family, dives into some of those stories to help listeners get to know the person who was lost and how their death affected those closest to them. Listen to The Murder in My Family everywhere you listen to podcasts. There are well over 100 episodes to binge on now.
When I went to high school, I played sports, and we had to have an eligibility card signed every week. Every teacher had to sign it, and they had to sign it on academics and citizenship. So if you didn't behave, you got your ass kicked out of class, you couldn't play that week.
Right.
So just that incentive, because I wanted to play in that game. So you'd think about, well, I could do this or that. And they're like, yeah, better not do that.
Yeah, you go to class with some act right.
Exactly. It's like you figured out how much weed you could carry that you could eat in the time it took for them to get out of the car and walk up to your window, right?
Yep.
I remember that in high school too. Like, yeah, we had 717. If I was not checked in with my football coach, the first time you did it that week, you were running gassers, and he said, had some colorful words, how long and what body parts you're going to have to pick up off the ground. You did that 2 times a week. You were sitting out that first quarter. That was, and imagine, my dad, if I had to talk to him and say, my God, I'm missing the first quarter of this game because I couldn't get my ass out of bed. I wouldn't be great. It was that incentive measure. Yeah, it was just that little thing to get you there. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm not turning loose of this. I want to know how you two met and got involved in this, because on the one hand, Greg, you're law clerking and you wound up joining the Right on Crime and the Texas Public Policy Foundation. You were in Forbes 30 under 30 list for law and policy, all of those kind of things. And then Clayton, you were the 2015 winner on NBC's Last Comic Standing.
Yeah.
You've opened for Chappelle and Bill Burr. You released a comedy album. You've been on Seth Meyers and Netflix, Tyler Perry's House of Pain, Comedy Central. You guys couldn't have been on 2 more different paths, both very successful and very accomplished at what you do, but different orbits. Where did this orbit intersect? At what point did you guys cross paths and intersect?
I think Greg can probably tell it best, but he was putting together this podcast, and like he said, he had heard some of my comedy, and we hopped on a couple of calls, and we just kind of clicked immediately. Once he explained to me what he does and what he wanted to do with this podcast, I was like, oh, okay. Like, he quoted one of my jokes to me, and I was like, yeah, it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. And I think we almost just kind of bonded over that little idea. And we probably talked for about, 30, 40 minutes just on that idea alone. And yeah, from there, we went off. But he could probably tell you better than me because this is kind of his brainchild.
Well, what was it, about like a year ago we talked, Clayton, maybe early 2022, 21. So, Dr. Phil, we have Jason Flom, who was one of the big producers at Atlantic Records, and one of his passions in life is wrongful conviction exoneration. And so we got connected because we have some ins and directs to either, governors, whatever, to try to help with certain cases. And we just continue to talk to each other about wanting to do a podcast like that. And our big thing was, we don't want to have, just the person like me that, I'm a white dude from the suburbs. I had a very different, background with the war on drugs and things like that. And we wanted someone with lived experience that could bring in entertainment value. So people really wanted to listen. And so we went on a search, and really we just were drawn to Clayton's, kind of the way that he would bring in actual real social world situations, and then bring humor to it. It really reminds me a lot of like Chappelle's comedy and the way that it's kind of built, where it says, you leave Clayton's show and you think about things. It's that type of show. And that's what we loved about it, where it brought that on. And so, yeah, like Clayton said, we chatted for a while. We vibed. Like, the first thing I said to everyone was like, Clayton could have been my buddy, like in high school, college. Like, as far as like coming from different backgrounds, we had so many similarities with things like that. And so that's really where it came from. It's been a brief romance, but a strong one here. So yeah, so we've been going, known each other about a year now. It's been great.
The romance is your word.
Yeah.
You could have at least said bromance, but no, you
romance. Hey, own it, man.
Don't sully what we have, Clayton.
No, you're right.
Right, so look, you said it in one sentence pretty well. It's a war on people, not a war on drugs. What needs to change? If we're not going to do what we're doing, and clearly what we're doing is not working. Everybody wants to point to the pandemic now because it was a major event, but this was a problem way before the pandemic. We go back to prohibition and all this kind of thing. We're not going to arrest our way out of this. So what should be happening right now? What should we be doing?
So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot from from a public policy standpoint, to try to kind of right some of the wrongs from the laws that are on the books and the things that we're able to do, our team works a lot on Capitol Hill and in states to, right now we're working on a bill called the Equal Act, which would, stop the crazy chasm between how we treat crack cocaine compared to powder cocaine, which are essentially pharmacologically, identical, except for crack, the way that you bake it allows it to be a much more pungent punch, cheaper, and shorter lived. And so that was essentially established after, in the 80s, kind of seeing the crack cocaine epidemic. And this is the way that we thought we're going to get out of it. It was a failure. And so to make that a 1-to-1 and start right-sizing some of those laws, reduce some of the mandatory minimums, allow for judges to see a case and say, the mandatory minimum says you're supposed to go to 10 years, but I think that you would be much better in recovering addiction. So you're going to go to jail for 2. There's all these things that we can kind of start picking at the edges around, limit the ways that law enforcement's able to, do no-knock warrants based upon, a minor drug bust and things like that. There's a lot of those civil liberty aspects of things. But when you're talking about actually winning this drug war overall from a policy standpoint, it is start to take a healthcare approach rather than a criminal justice approach, to allow for experts to lead on this and get people into recovery, through methods that we know work. And so, one thing I do somewhat agree with, but I don't like the way that it's been implemented in practice. It is kind of some of the, medically assisted treatments that we see, that have been effective in places like Europe and Switzerland, where you allow people to come in and utilize, drugs and wean them off in a certain way. But I think that we failed at that as a public policy standpoint, kind of going the other way, and have allowed for open air drug markets to proliferate in places like San Francisco and Philadelphia and Baltimore. And I don't think that's the right way either. We need to find that balance between, actual tough love and allowing for this and understanding that aspects. But we kind of go one way or the other. We either try to criminalize our way out of it or essentially ignore the problem. And it really is that tough love standpoint where we have carrots, we have sticks. You can't just, you have to earn your way off of this, but also lead you through a place of empathy and understanding that failure is a part of recovery. That's the one part. You see a lot of things that we try to do from diversion, but the first time they have a dirty urine test, or the first time they miss a meeting, we throw them out on their ass, or we throw them in prison. And these are the types of things that fail and what bring people back to relapse. So it's complicated, it's messy, but having that tough love aspect and trying to lead with policy and evidence rather than kind of feel, that's where we need to start at the very least.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for a minute, because I'm well aware of some of the safe zone practices and stuff in some of the Nordic and European countries, and some of those that advocate for that in the United States, and they cite the success levels in Europe to justify doing that here, but they're not doing the same thing here.
Right.
That's just bullshit. And maybe it's a thin line between enabling and actually keeping people safe. And it has to do with outcome criteria, I guess. If your outcome criteria is, we haven't had a single overdose because we got lasers to shoot through here and see if there's fentanyl in here. We have people there to intervene if there is an overdose. And so we haven't had anybody die in our clinic here. Okay, that's true. But we're not trying to get people to use destructive drugs safely. We're trying to get them off of the destructive drugs. And my problem with some of these programs is they don't have a strong enough exit strategy.
Right.
They got a strategy to get them into the safe zone, but they don't have a strong enough exit strategy to get them out into a program that can actually get them off of the drugs.
Right.
This, well, we have a social worker in the building. Well, yeah, I got it. But there's not really a strong enough exit ramp to get them out of the safe zone and into rehab. And they say, well, look at our criteria. We haven't had a single overdose. And there are people dying on the street, but they're not dying in here. Well, that's surrendering to the disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They say, we're going to go along with you doing the drugs as long as you don't die on our turf. That's, to me, not a solution.
And I think in, what is it, Switzerland? Or was
it?
They actually have where they get the people a job, and the person has to go to work. And there's more step, like you said, the criteria is more than just, hey, you didn't die. And yeah, that's a very low bar to have. Like, and I don't think that's very much different than how we look at the people, where we look at them like they're the outcasts of society.
Yeah, the goals there are recovery and to move on. And I think the goals here, those are not the same goals. And actually, you kind of look at where a lot of those European countries were prior to trying to bring these types of policies in. They were doing what, San Francisco and other places are doing, essentially just having safe zones and enabling, but it actually didn't get to the underlying root causes until they started getting, more intentional about treating people and weaning them off. The ultimate goal is to have less addiction, to have people recover, to have them thriving jobs, not just to not have someone die here. It kind of reminds me of almost like the parent that everyone knew in high school that allowed everyone to drink at their house. And then it was like, all right, you're safe here for the next 4 hours, but on your way after that, like, it's not really helping. You're enabling a problem instead of actually trying to get to that root cause. So having those interactions between, addiction specialists and doctors and social workers and putting in safe environments, great. But it's kind of like with prisons, like, all right, you have these people here, you have this captivated audience. What's the next step? And we're not doing that next step here. And it's looked at as empathy. And I think it's coming from a lot of the times a good place of empathy to try to help people, but we're really not providing that. You need to stop doing the behavior you're doing, or else this is only going to get worse. And yeah, it's a tough road, but yeah, that's what we need to do. We're not doing that.
It's based on the wrong predicate, though. Like the parent who says, well, if my child's going to drink, I'd rather him drink here. Well, that's a big if.
Right.
If your aunt had nuts, she'd be your uncle. That's a big if, So you got to say, if my kid's going to drink, are you giving that up if your kid's going to drink at 14? Well, you're saying here in these safe zones, if you're going to do drugs, well, let's not just accept the predicate to that hypothesis there. If you're going to do drugs, well, let's not accept that you're just going to do drugs. What if you don't? What are we offering you as an alternative to that? And the answer is nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that this behavior is okay, and not providing an actual path away from it. And so why wouldn't they drink and drive later on? Essentially, you're getting kind of tacit agreement that this is fine.
If I could do it here,
I can do it anyway. Yeah, why not? And then you have a lack of a law enforcement approach when they're not doing things. So you are in these open air drug markets and you're doing that, but it's not like there's enforcement beyond these areas to actually help keep places clean. And the thing that they're not doing as well, and a lot of the places like in Switzerland, they're actually providing medical care through providing the methadone or potentially, and sometimes, heroin or the actual drug. A lot of the root causes of crime are people trying to keep up with a $200-300 habit. And that's not getting to that. They're bringing their own drugs there to essentially use in a certain way, but they're still having to rob, deal, prostitute, whatever else to get the financial means to get that. And so you're not actually tackling a lot of these underlying problems. You're just kind of giving a safe space for a couple hours, then all the other problems still exist. And I don't see how that's going to be effective long term.
Yeah, and look at it from the family standpoint. I deal with a lot of these families that have a heroin addict in the family, and they'll tell you, look, we don't want them dying under a bridge, but if we let them come home and we go to sleep, they will come in our room. They'll steal everything we own. They'll take our credit cards out of our wallets. They'll take money, jewelry, and go out and turn it into drugs, because we all know if you're seriously addicted, you're going to do whatever it takes to get that next fix because you're trying to avoid being deathly ill.
Yeah.
So what do we tell those families? And they say, well, I'd rather them be in jail than under a bridge. They can't come home. I don't want them under a bridge where they're going to get beaten, raped, robbed, killed, or whatever. If they're in jail, at least I know where they are. Well, I suppose there's something to that, but giving somebody 3 hots and a cot so mom doesn't have to worry is not the objective of incarcerating people.
Right.
A, they're going to do drugs while they're in jail, and B, the minute they get out, they're going right back into the system they were doing drugs with before. So let's be specific. If we're going to spend the next 50 years focused on something, what are the 3 or 4 priorities that the policy needs to focus on for the next 50 years?
I think the biggest thing is to remove the incentives that kind of proliferate the drug war first off when you're talking about kind of just big government and continue to turn the wheels. And so one of the problems that we have right now, and you see this all throughout the drug war, is that there is an incentivization to continue to make these low-level arrests through either grant programs or whatever, or it makes you look good. The more arrests you have, the more prosecutions you get on these. And we go after the lowest common denominator because these are the easiest cases. And so kind of removing some of those incentives away, saying that good policing doesn't look like the amount of arrests you have. Good prosecuting doesn't mean how many convictions you're getting. And so we have to really divorce those things away from each other. So that's one policy standpoint I think we really need to hit on. And then I think a lot of this is taking a lot of the resources and dollars that we're putting in just locking people up and trying to find those alternatives and setting up actual statewide healthcare centers that can come together with law enforcement and actually try to bring people out with checks and balances and incentives and carrots and sticks. And we've seen that being effective in minor little, studies and things like that. But doing that on an expanded level, I think is going to be helpful. And then also kind of implementing some of these things in practice in a correctional facility. One of the things that we've been pushing for is, having some sort of medically, assisted treatment within jails and prisons. And because of the lack of correctional officers, and because of the lack of resources, or really the desire to even do any of this stuff, people try to get off or wean drugs in jail in this horrific setting, when we should be trying to kind of help them bridge that if we're going to have in this carceral area. So I think that's something that we really, really need to start looking on. You've seen a lot of effectiveness in reducing overdose deaths, reducing addiction post-release, if you're able to kind of tackle that problem while they're incarcerated, if we're going to continue to incarcerate people for these types of things. And so those are, I think, the main ones that I'm looking at. And then a lot of it's with social stigma with addiction still. I think there's still propaganda and a villainization of people that utilize drugs. And this is a behavior that we don't want, but that doesn't mean people are evil if they go through that. And so I think we're slowly seeing, Dr. Phil, one of the things that's been actually, a positive of kind of the opioid epidemic and fentanyl epidemic, is that it has been hitting different social areas. It's been hitting rural places. So people that were kind of at a distance from the drug war for a long, long time are now seeing it face to face and understand, well, that's Tommy, our neighbor's kid. He's not a bad kid. He's a screw up here and there, and he messed up here and he's gotten into some stuff. Or I know Bob lost his job, or I lost my job, or I got strung out on opiates, with a busted knee, and now, my doctor's unprescribed. Like, you kind of see it firsthand, and I think that changes people a little bit. And so reducing that stigma, I think will be a major aspect, and we're slowly starting to see that. But those are kind of the biggies from a policy perspective that I could see is much more investment as a healthcare issue than a criminal justice one, and removing those incentives for the criminal justice system to continue to proliferate off this.
Clayton, what do you think people need to hear that are on drugs that's going to get them to be drawn towards some kind of help instead of hide from people that are out there trying to help? What do you think people need to hear that are on the drugs?
Man, that's a tough one. But I think they need to know that it's people that actually care about them. And there's people out there that want to see them a functioning member of society. So, I don't really know where to begin. I think like even I have people in my family, like, you don't know, you want them to get the help. It's like you said, you bring them into your house and they could be good for max maybe 2 weeks before stuff starts turning up missing, and everybody's gonna turn on them, and that's why they're out on the street. That's why they're cast out. But I think that there's people out there that, want to see them do well. But from what I hear, they got to hit that bottom. They gotta hit rock bottom before they even start seeking help, or they got to get to such a low point that, it's sad that that's the way it is, but that's what I hear. So I think the best thing people can do that aren't on drugs is be there and help guide these people when they're trying to come back into society, and not just look at them like they're the lowest piece of trash.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's trying to show that they have value and that they can provide something, and actually showing that in action. This always sticks out to me when I visited a prison. There was a guy that was in and out of it. It was either a string of robberies or larceny, but a lot of it was drugs to kind of keep that habit going. And he finally got enrolled in a class while he was in prison, and he said something, and the instructor, he said, said like, "Oh, you're really smart." And he's like, "That's the first time I've ever heard anyone say that." And he had been like a model inmate since then. And I think he's released at this point, unless something else had happened. But I do think it is that value aspect that people don't see their value once they get into this process, and they're living day in and day out, just trying to keep this fix. And so can we provide you with some value either through family reunification, through maintaining and earning, living accommodations, either through work or treatment and things like that? I think earning those types of things, not only does it kind of bring you out and give you that incentive to stay within this better environment, but it brings pride to you. It brings something like there's nothing more prideful than doing well at your job, being able to buy a house or buy that new car, and like striving for those goals and earning them. You see it all the time with like people that win the lottery. They get millions and millions of dollars, and then they're bankrupt and on their ass like later because they didn't earn it. They didn't actually do that blood, sweat, and tears. Like Clayton, how amazing was it to probably open for Chappelle or win last time? So when you'd done all those hours before, going into shitty comedy clubs across the country, doing opening acts, all that open mic stuff, like to finally like hit that point and peak, that's what matters. Like that, and then you're like, okay, like I've made it. Like, and that means so much more than like, here's your award, or you're playing the Forum tonight, you didn't earn your shit. Like it's a bigger diff. Yeah.
And with you saying that, I think the thing that I would tell people that are addicted is kind of learning from Dr. Phil just now while we've been sitting here is figure out what you want to do. Figure out what you want to do, where you want to be. And it's so many people who have came from addiction that have gone on to be some of the most prolific writers, actors, musicians, all types of, beautiful art has been created from people who, if we just looked at them in one point of their life, would be viewed as an addict. So yeah, find something. Because comedy was definitely that for me.
I think you guys are hitting on it spot on, because I've talked to so many hardcore addicts, and the first thing that jumps out at me is they think they're living the life that they're worthy of. If they're prostituting themselves or they're living on the street and they haven't bathed for a month, they've got head lice or whatever it is, you talk to them and you listen to their internal dialogue. If you can get them to tell you what they're telling themselves, you don't ask yourself why they're doing it. You ask yourself why not, because they're telling themselves that they're worthless human beings and that if they overdose, so what? It's no big loss to their family, to society, or whatever. Anytime you start telling somebody, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, defensiveness goes up really high. But if you approach them, like both of you just said it, if you approach them from the standpoint of saying, hey, I love you, I care about you, you deserve better. I want treatment for you, I want help for you, because you deserve it. You deserve a better life. You deserve this help. And then the focus has to be on making them feel like they're worthy of receiving that help. I can't tell you how many times I've had addicts sitting on stage with me and I stop and say, let me ask you something. You're here right now with me on this stage, and you have the undivided attention of my team over the last week and me now and all these people here. How do you feel about that? And you would think they would say, fortunate. I feel like I'm really, and their response invariably is, I don't deserve it.
Right.
I'm not worthy. I'm sitting here with you and there are 10,000 people that want to be in this chair. I'm not worthy of being here. Somebody else should be here instead of me. And somebody else your team should have been working with. And you're offering me this amazing rehabilitation opportunity and all this professional help, and I don't deserve it. It's clear to me that the fundamental threshold you have to cross over is they have to decide, I am worthy of it, and I'm going to live up to that. If we'd spent 50 years helping these disenfranchised, marginalized, no goal, no passion people to feel worthy, that they can require more of themselves and they deserve more of this life, I think we'd be a lot further along than we have been arresting them and locking them up for half an ounce of this or a half a gram of that. If we'd taken all that time and effort and helped them feel better about who they were, then you treat yourself better.
Yeah.
And we're not doing that.
No, it's exactly right. And, just like any war, to be effective, you have to essentially turn your population through propaganda against this enemy. And that's what we've done, just vilify this population and made them seem like they're lesser than. And that's been by practice. That's not, that's not a flaw in the system. That's been by design. So that they're able to increase sentences. So you can do all these things with civil asset forfeiture, where you take people's stuff without convicting them of a crime, where you're able to utilize a no-knock warrant, essentially deprive people of these liberties because of this war, because drug addicts are bad and they're villains. They are the enemy of this war. And we have done that over and over again, rather than saying this is a problem, this is some behavior that we don't want in our society. But the way we get out of this is love, empathy, and value in these people around the other way, just like anything else. I mean, think about, beating your kids, spanking your, doing all these things to children, we would not accept. Like, it's not that hard. It's not rocket science to understand. It's not anything different than what you're saying, just how you do parenting or being a teacher, or anything else, just teaching people how to be people and providing value in their lives. That's what we're supposed to do as a society. And we have utterly failed this, population.
Yeah, I see 6 cops go do a marijuana bust, and it's like, really?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
6 cops. I mean, the guy's going to answer the door and say, "Hey, y'all come in."
Right.
It's like,
Right.
you need 6 cops, jack boots, coming in, and the guy's going to offer them some ice cream or something. Like, relax.
Yeah. It's
We
not that big of a deal. Yeah.
We talk about the no-knock warrants and how the main reason for them is because they don't want the criminals flushing the drugs. And I'm like, if you got enough drugs that you could just flush it, you didn't have that much drugs.
Yeah.
Like, you weren't the kingpin. Like,
One of my best friends is Ron White, the comedian.
oh yeah, he's great.
They arrested him down in Florida. He landed there in his private plane, and they said, "We got a tip that you got drugs." And they searched him, and they said, "Well, I'm sorry, Mr. White, you're going to have to go with us. We found a 1/4 of an ounce of marijuana in your bag over here." He said, "A 1/4 ounce? Let me tell you, I got a 1/4 ounce of weed. I consider myself out of weed."
Right. He probably didn't know he had it.
Yeah.
Exactly. He did consider himself out of weed.
Yeah.
They took his ass to jail. He was 2.5 hours late for his show.
Oh,
They were
man.
outside the jail with signs that said, "Free the tater."
Come on.
Awesome. Yeah. Mission.
That's
Yeah.
great,
Like, roll down the
man.
mission accomplished thing for the law enforcement there. Like, yeah, is that what we really want?
Yeah.
Like cops doing? Yeah.
And as a comedian, you just want to make it to your show. And Ron, like you said, he knew that amount was nothing. Like,
That's what he spilled in the bottom of his bag when he was
Right,
getting
that
out
was-
the weed
that
he
was
was going to
shake.
use. Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, you guys are so on point about this, and I'm not somebody that says, "Hey, we just need to overlook this." We shouldn't overlook people that are on drugs or addiction, because it ruins their life, and it spreads and it ruins family lives, and children wind up being raised by grandparents. There's a gap with grandparents raising children of drug addicts, and so much is lost and all. But I'm telling you, we are not going to arrest our way out of this. We are not going to incarcerate our way out of this. We've got to have a strategy and a philosophy, and most people get clean on the 7th or 8th attempt, and the failure rate is very high because we need to improve our interventions. We need to improve our treatment, and it all starts with the better somebody feels about themselves, the better they're going to treat themselves and the less they're willing to settle for. It starts there. I don't know any policymaker, I don't know any policy I've read that is all in on helping these people believe in who they are again and getting them back into society in that way. I hear it talked about, but I don't see it implemented And if you don't put the funds behind it, you might as well go talk to yourself out in the woods. You guys are drawing attention to this in the right way, and God bless you for doing it.
Well, yeah, that's
man, that means a lot coming from you, man. Appreciate you.
Well, listen, if I can help you guys in any way going forward, I hope you'll let me know, and I hope we can talk about this again. If there are things we can do to draw attention to this, man, I'm in. You just let me know. Put me in, coach, because I think you guys are going at this the right way and doing it with the right spirit. You're not being defensive about people that are on drugs. You're just talking about the realities of what it takes to get this done. I commend you on what you're doing. I'm going to promote your podcast every chance I get. When we're dealing with some of those stories and cases, I'm going to ask you guys to come on and help me deal with some of these families and some of these cases where they understand there are people out there that care.
We
awesome.
love that. And yeah, trust me, I got a laundry list of action items. So let's keep talking. There's some people that you really need to get out, and some other items that I think we could really collaborate on. So this won't be the last time you'll hear from me. Yeah, I'll definitely be calling you. Yeah.
Well, same here. I'm proud to know you guys. You're a lot of fun, and you talk about things that matter. That's what I love to do. And once again, I'm indebted to Jason Flom. Damn it. Introducing me to the right people on the right issues. So I appreciate it. Guys, thank you for your time. Let's do this again, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Phil. Really appreciate it. This was fun.
Thanks a lot. We'll talk again.
All right.
Take care.
All right, thanks.